I need to get a fan, for all you Jeromes out there. All right. I have my Coke San right here. No, I'm just joking. Some of you might get the joke. Anyway, so R.I.P. Rest in peace, Frank Martinez, also known as Omar. I just got the news today from Susan Whetstone, the mother of Orange County punk rock. So Frank Martinez, like he went to Edison. I think he graduated in '80. I think he was like a year. I think he was born in '63 or '62, maybe. And anyway, oh, the light went out. Anyway, so I just heard he died. I was talking to Pat Carpenter and messaged a few friends of mine. Well, many people knew him better. I met when I started hanging around with China White, like Frank Martinez was definitely part of that circle. So, but I got to know him a little bit better when we all, at the end of '81, like December '81, we all, China White and Channel 3, went up to San Francisco to play at the Sound of Music and the Mabuhay Guardians. And so he was there. I don't know. I think he must have come up with James Rodriguez drove. There was a couple carloads. I flew up myself. I was the only one to fly up. And I had my own hotel room and at Sam Wong's and Rick Harrison, Frank Ruffino, and I think Bobby Cripps. I think there was four of us that stayed in my room, and then Mark Martin and Brent Coker had their room around. And they ended up moving over to like the other one, like over on the other side of Broadway, of the Broadway tunnel. They found a place. So, so I was 81. I was like 17, and Frank Martinez, like like all the shows I went to at the Golden Bear, the Cuckoo's Nest, and the Starwood, they didn't. I think they must have been all ages, or they didn't check IDs, or so. Mabuhay Gardens was the first place I went to when we had to be 18 years old. So I wasn't able to get there. My name was on the. We had a big guest list because there was like 12 or 15 of us that went up there all together, which I read about in my book Junkyard. And anyway, so Frank, I go, well, let me borrow your ID. You're the one that looks at all these guys. You're the one that we look alike, And like Frank was kind of like kind of a Sid Vicious kind of punk rock looking dude, but I guess that's how I saw myself out. But I don't know if he was fully Mexican or half breed or what the deal was. But I just go, okay. And when I went up to the door, I did kind of my impersonation of Frank, some kind of Sid Vicious look, I guess. But I got in because like I noticed that his name was on the list twice. So we kind of bonded over that. And then all the shows that China White played, like the one in Laguna Canyon where Dave Wright died, Frank was there. Frank was at, they would practice. There was parties. Frank was always there. I think after that, TSO and China White were supposed to play in Santa Ana, and they canceled the gig, the New Year's Eve gig. You can look up online. There was the Broadway Theater in Santa Ana. There was a great lineup, but most of the bands never played. And then Frank Ruffino was telling me, "Oh yeah, we got paid $500. It's the most I ever made, and we didn't even get to play and stuff." So I would go. I went up to. I remember seeing China White up until summer of '82, and then it just seems, the scene kind of changed a little bit. The punk, Godzilla's had come and went. Some other things that have been happening, like the drugs started changing, and some of those OG HB punk rockers started getting into harder drugs. That wasn't my scene, but I remember hanging around with Frank a little bit because at that time, because I started, when punk, went kind of hardcore and kind of it just became kind of obnoxious to go out to gigs and all this fighting. It became kind of boring after about a year or two. So we I mean, there was like at that time, 82, 83. There was like post punk. There was like a rockabilly revival. There was the ska. I'd already been to the On Club by that time, and then I started going to the country club, and I saw Motorhead and like heavy metal bands. So there was kind of a heavy metal scene. I think it was Frank. Me and Frank met um, Metallica, Lars Ulrich over in Costa Mesa when before he had moved up to, because like he had lived in either Newport Beach or Costa Mesa for I think a year playing tennis or something. So I think we met him during that time at someone's house over where on the same street as the Cuckoo's Nest. In that time, they might have played there in the early days, like 81. This is 81 or maybe even 82. And so like we you know, Frank, by that time, our hair was growing longer and we started hanging around some people like Dan Rude and the other guy. I forgot the guy's name. I definitely hung around. I see him around once in a while. I forget, but yeah, there was a possibility like the heavy metal, and I was, we kind of morphed. I mean, the goth thing was starting to happen, so I started seeing the Cramps had moved to LA, so I saw the Cramps in the early days was the band I saw a bunch of times, and I had seen Motorhead, and I saw like Lords of the New Church pretty early on, and so there was kind of a morphing into like some new thing. They didn't call it post punk yet, but it was just kind of a continuation of the punk scene. So Frank, and then yeah, things. I kind of I was hanging around. Like I started going to college, and so I was hanging around some people that were going to my school, and I guess we were doing films, and the Safari Sam's era started to happen, and I don't think Frank was really a part of that, but I sold an amp to Brett Leon, and then we decided to form a band with me on guitar. Frank got a bass. Oh, that was the other thing. Frank, he was like the first guy that I know of that had a kid. He hooked up with a chick, and I remember going to visit him. So yeah, like around that time, I remember going over to Susan Whetstone, and I think Frank might have lived in the same apartment over, like kind of somewhere over on Delaware or somewhere. And when I was playing in a band with Rick Harrison from the Clints and Benny Rapp, there was like talk, and Greg Sisson was also in our band, but I never played with Greg Sisson. I did play with Don Snell in that band, but when Sisson joined, I left because I kind of wanted Stone Off to join us, but he never joined us and stuff. And so I became friends with Stone Off, and then I just started playing with other people. And then that's when I started Bell Jar and Satan's Cheerleaders, like around that time, like when I left that band. So I used to, I was friendly with Frank, and then when I sold the guitar amp to Leon, I don't know why I did that, but I did. We had a band we called it Drug Culture, and we just kind of it would be like we would have a party, just have a bunch of drinks and do some drugs, and then we would play, and we I think we might have played at Brett's house. We played over at Steve Yeager's, and we played at some place in over in Newport Beach, and I remember Mihez was the singer, Chris Mihez, and so there was that. And then I remember going over to Susan Whetstone's place a couple times, and we would all be hanging out with Rick Harrison, Sisson, and Frank Martinez, Omar. So, and then we had the band, and then I didn't see Frank, and then, when, I moved to San Francisco and New York, and when I came back, I ran into Frank Martinez. I think he lived in the, close by here, and we had the same bank, and I saw him in there one time, and maybe around 2001, 2002, and he looked definitely. I had heard stories because I was still in touch with Mihez and Brett Leon, so I had heard stories, and I saw him like, oh, hey Frank, what's up? So I saw him then, and then and then this picture that I would run into. He was definitely at the Frank Ruffino Memorial or whatever celebration there at the observatory, and also I ran into him at a pill show. That was probably like the last time. No, well, the pill show was before, so I guess maybe there was also like Stiff Little Fingers show at the observatory, which was around that time. So I ran into him a few times. I just, and like a lot of his friends, a lot of the people that lived in the Continentals, Rich Sebesta, Ron Hernandez, and Frank is one of the. I don't know if he ever lived. I think I don't know if he grew up in the Continentals, but he definitely lived there later. But they're all no longer with us. He was like the last one. So rest in peace, Frank. It was, there were some good times there. Okay, thank you. Good night.